concept of gross happiness index. So Bhutan is known to be the most happiest country in the world. Ultimately, this should be the metric of development, right? So in this article, we are looking at how we have to conduct diplomatic activities even when there are disagreements. See, India, China, and Bhutan, the stakeholders in this situation. India contributes to the growth of Bhutan through hydropower, basically. The biggest takeaway for Bhutan from India is hydropower. But after the Doklam conflict, even China started involving in the issues of Bhutan. The shared cultural values. What are the shared cultural values you are talking about? Soft power diplomacy. So, any country, we are basically looking at the power equation from two dimensions. Hard power, soft power. So, what is soft power here? The soft power component is the shared cultural history. It is the shared cultural history of Buddhism. And when it comes to the hard power, what are the components we discuss? Trade, economy, military might, cooperation between two countries on these metrics and parameters. Buddhism. And when it comes to hard power, it is economy, trade, military might. So, do you have any history of military cooperation between India and Bhutan? Yes. In 2003, there is something called Operation Hope, where insurgent groups were removed. When it comes to the economic activities, we have hydropower cooperation between these two countries, where we contribute significantly to the GDP of Bhutan in that way. Okay, so for hard power, major factor is hydropower. Soft power, the major factor is culture. So these are the keywords that you can use when it comes to Bhutan. That is the only thing you have to remember for our article. So you will have a very detailed relation and entire history of Bhutan relations. May not be that fruitful, but you just have to know. Okay. Yeah. This article, we need to move from a caste census with a capital C to, basically this is talking about the problems that we might have with caste census. So this is discussed multiple times even in the past, but I'm quickly covering this again. What is caste census? Caste census is an enumeration of the number of people in this country pertaining to certain castes, and it has the highest significance for OBCs. Okay, if you go back to the history of the caste enumeration, the only time where the data we have on the number of people pertaining to some caste is in 1931. Even though in 2011 we conducted a socio-economic caste census, we did not reveal the data because there is a danger of caste fragmentation in the society, and a caste-ridden political structure can pop up, is the justification given. So to avoid that kind of a scenario now, we need to focus on caste census with an objective to empower each caste member, otherwise it will become the same old problem. We have covered these articles multiple times, and there is no new addition here. So I'm not further explaining that point. That is all you need to look at this. This article quotes a lot of sociologists. So if you're having sociology optional, you can focus on the name of the thinkers here And this is important because you can see here, these are the latest works that you can come across. So please note this latest works, do the background search, and you will be able to quote them in your contemporary paper too, especially. Okay. Clean air is not a privilege. Right to life begins with right to breathe. I'm using this article to explain the overall framework in which UPSC is asking questions. So, I want to explain the transition of UPSC mains over the years, especially in the context of GS2. Let me explain how. Initially, if you take a look at the syllabus design, GS2 syllabus, you can broadly divide it into first, institutional design. First set of questions was about institutional design. What do I mean by this? If you go to your GS2 syllabus, what is the first point? Guys, I've told you multiple times, please start by hearting your syllabus. What is your first point? Historical. At least open now. Please open by heart it now. Historical background. Why do you think our syllabus starts here? Is there any logic? Just random. Because it is history, that's why we are starting with that. That's exactly the point of having a constitution. History should not repeat itself. Yes, history repeats itself. And that's why to stop that from repetition, we have the historical background and certain values are passed on to the next generation through a written and argued, reasoned constitution. So, institutional design is based on some principles. Okay, there is a logic as to why a constitution should be there like that. One step behind this is the beaten to death concept that we have discussed probably hundreds of times. Can you tell me what is that concept? Social contract. In a social contract between an individual and a state, individual should give duty and state will give rights. It is the most simplistic framework. But why should they? The arguments and the logic part is what constitutes this institutional design. Okay. So, if there is a question pertaining to rights, fundamental rights, UPSC mains questions will mainly talk about this logic part. If you take a look at the previous year questions, especially this 2025 paper, you will see there are multiple layers within a single question. So, there is this question, GS2 19th question, I guess. What is the question saying? The question is something like this. If you have GS2 paper, if you can just open and correct me if I'm going wrong anywhere. GS2 19th question, 19th or 17th, I don't remember. Basically, it says that even though we want to take decisions, the people who are taking the decisions are completely away from where the source of information is. Something on those lines. How can you explain this is the question. Very conceptual question. Can you read out the question, someone? Okay. Contemporary development models. Okay. Decision making and problem solving responsibilities.
Close to the source of information and executing the objective of the
Execution is not close to source of information. Okay. Critically examine. Can you see the complexity in this question? It is not so obvious. Contemporary developmental models. Which part of the syllabus are we talking about in GS2? Governance. Of course it is governance. But what do you mean by this contemporary developmental model? Can you pinpoint a single word? In terms of governance, how is e-governance? Okay, e-governance is one way, fine. But what is the overall governance philosophy? What is it based on? Take a look at the question. You will get a clue. Read the question carefully. Look at the clues in the question. Can you understand the question? Do you think you will get answer for this in some ready-made content? Will you get it in a single newspaper article? Not necessarily. Then how do you understand? How do you decipher this? Try the clues. Exactly. This is talking about division of powers and separation of powers. So when you're talking about division between the national and subnational units, we are talking about federalism. When you're talking about the contemporary developmental model, a governance structure based on federalism. But the problem is, execution is not close to the source of information. Someone in Delhi at the national level is deciding the solution for a local problem. So this mismatch between local governments and national governance, government governance, is what is causing the problem. Okay, why am I talking about all of this? You need to know how the subject is evolving. To understand how the subject is evolving, you need to understand the order in which the syllabus evolved, paper evolved, concepts evolved. So, in order to solve questions like this, what you need is extreme clarity. So, what is the clarity that we're talking about? Let's go back to the step number 1. If you want to make this social contract work, what is the step number 1 that you need to know? The philosophy based on which this entire governance structure is designed. So the design philosophy. Under this design philosophy, you will get the concept of constitutionalism. Under constitutionalism only, you will get concepts like rule of law, separation of powers, federalism, parliamentary form of government. All these chapters which are there in the first part of Lakshmikant, before the parliament chapter, first 18 chapters till emergency. All the questions along with the concepts and the principles should be extremely clear because they create the design philosophy of our institutions. Unless you know this, which will be tested in the prelims level, sometimes even at the mains level, if I ask you, list down the features of parliamentary democracy, how many of you can write down? Without missing a single point. Whatever point that is there in Lakshmikant, you should be able to reproduce it with the spirit of that concept, not just namesake, listing down. So that is the first problem. You not having a clear-cut clarity on the principles. What is rule of law? What is due process of law or procedure established by law? The conceptual difference between them. What is separation of powers? The doctrine of separation of powers. How does it manifest in the constitution? What is federalism? Intent behind federalism, and how is it manifesting in reality? Both the intent as well as the design part should be very clear. That is nothing but Lakshmikant. This is step number 1 only. You are not going to write good answers only with this step. But without this, none of it makes sense. Clear? So, let's say if you are talking about federalism, you will also have to capture the principle behind this federalism so that this design philosophy will manifest in a governance architecture. Which brings us to the second point. Design philosophy will actually create an operations through institutions. So these institutions should be decentralized. And this decentralization principle is actually captured through a key word given in the second ARC, and it's called principle of subsidiarity. Anybody? Anybody with public administration? You will know about this word. So, when you decentralize, the corresponding principle is subsidiarity. If you can't delegate your work, if you want to do it all by yourself and you don't want to decentralize that power, it is simply inefficient. Okay? So this is the second part. You design, you put it into operations through institutions. Then this delegation is not enough. You have to further distribute it between different power centers. So you will come to distribution. So these institutions will again be there through parliament, then state legislative assembly. This is the design philosophy. To operationalize this philosophy, you need to make laws that will build institutions. That is the second step. Then you distribute the power. And in this distribution process only, you will be talking about the principle of federalism, which we were talking about here. Okay, please have some patience when I'm talking about this, because this forms the basis of understanding entire polity. Whatever question that you get in GS2 will either be a part of this chain only. You design, you operate, you distribute that power between states. This is where federalism as a principle comes into the picture. After this is done, you need to see the outcome. This outcome is nothing but social justice. You have welfare mechanisms, right, in your syllabus. That part will come here. And when you project this to the international arena, the same projection is nothing but international relations, where the principle guiding us is strategic autonomy. Now, take any question in GS2 in the last 10-15 years. It will be a part of this life cycle only. You design, operate, distribute the power, operationalize. If something is not working, fix it. Pros, cons, conclusion, you must have heard about this, right? Read any question from this paper, it will fall under this only. This is the overall philosophy with which you have to approach the GS2 paper. Now, in this context, we are looking at an article which says that clean air is not a privilege. Right to life begins with right to breathe. When you are having this kind of an article, where do you think our topic will come? Which step? Where will you put that topic in this? The very first step. Every fundamental right issue is about design philosophy. So here what is supposed to be very clear? Arguments. And to substantiate your arguments, what is the best source? Supreme Court judgments. Okay? See, everybody must have told you that you should write committee reports, judgments, etc. But why? You need to know the why, right? Why are we quoting Supreme Court judgments? Anybody? When you are discussing design, who has the best scope to give authenticity and legitimacy to that design philosophy? Why Supreme Court? Because of its constitutional role as the guardian and the protector of the constitutional values. So when you quote cases, you understand the logic now. Now let's read the clean air is not a privilege. What is the difference between a privilege and a right? So when you're asking for clean air, the author says it's not a privilege. What do you understand by it? Okay. My question is, how can you justify something as basic? There must be some criteria to say this is basic. For me, let's say I want an air condition which is basic. I want a Rolls Royce case because I think it's basic. Now what? How will you decide what is basic? Nature. Why should it be like that? Okay, human rights. A good start. Human rights. What do you mean by a human right? Anything that upholds the dignity of an individual is basic. What is that? Okay, the principle is good. But what is the mechanism to decide this will uphold my dignity or not? Principle and mechanism. This is the why. Why part you answered. Now I'm asking how. How will you decide that this is upholding my dignity? Majority. Democracy is not the same as a right. In a democracy, if a party wants to come to power, even if they got 37%, they were in power. It literally means the other set 60 plus, they rejected, right? But right is not like that. Even after that 60 odd percent people were rejecting this government and this government came to power, they will still have to give rights. They can't say, I will only give it to my voters. Then what is it? Okay, let me put it very simply. Anything that, if I have to correct your answer or not correct, just add some prefix. Anything that allows us to explore our potential with dignity is a human right. So that it is not denying us an opportunity to explore our potential. So anything that has got to do with a human body, either physically or mentally, anything that takes away the agency from a human body and mind is an impediment to human progress. So any human right is basically that empowers people to use their body and mind to their fullest potential. That is a human right. So Universal Declaration of Human Rights that came out in 1948 was basically talking about a list of human rights which will allow a human body and a mind to express themselves completely, both physical and mental. Why? Because it is linked to the concept of dignity. Every person who explores their potential should be given an opportunity with dignity, not with an insult. And that is the gateway for living a very peaceful life. So with this concept only, we have had the Fundamental rights. Now, in one class, a student asked me, so this human rights concept came in 1948, but our Constituent Assembly started in 1946. Then how did we get human rights in fundamental rights? These concepts are not new. They were codified in 1948, but they were existing much before. What is the oldest democracy in the world? US. When did they get their independence? 17? The did okay. Did independent US have 50 states within the federation? How many states did it start with? 13. So, is it safe to say that they annexed the rest of them? Why do you think there was a civil war in 1860s? Every democracy went through its own history, its own set of challenges. So, across humanity, you have seen something so fundamentally common because of the fact that they are fundamental. That is, if you strip them of these rights and dignity, they can no longer be considered human. So, this collective history throughout the story of our evolution gave us these principles. Okay, so that's how they manifested in fundamental rights. Now, look at this article. Tell me now, the headline, does it make sense? So, where will you put this article? Under which fundamental right? Right to life. Perfect. Why do you think Article 21 is ever expanding? If you take a look at Lakshmikant textbook, the list of rights keep on adding up. Why do you think so? Because every human right issue eventually becomes a point of contention where Supreme Court has to intervene. Okay? So the line of argument on any article pertaining to Article 21 will be the same. It is fundamentally linked to the concept of human rights. And whenever you are confused, how do I decide this is a human right or not? Ask this question. Has it got anything to do with I having autonomy over my body to express my potential? Okay? Also of your mind. In this context, let me ask you a question. Do you have a right to suicide? Because it's your autonomy. Why? You are expressing yourself. That's your autonomy. Right to die with dignity. But is there dignity in a suicide? Is it legal? Are you sure? Under Article 21 or Article 25? Look at Amit Soni judgment. This is a homework for you. Go back and read this contentious issue. Is it, if we have a right to suicide, why do you think previously anyone who's attempting a suicide would be jailed and criminalized? How many of you watch movies? There was an old movie where the protagonist is hero Venkatesh, Telugu hero. I don't remember the name of the movie, maybe Ganesh or something. Maybe he'll commit a suicide and goes to the jail, attempts a suicide so that he goes to the jail to plot against the villain, something like that. So that incident is good enough for you to say we don't have the right to commit a suicide. You will be jailed previously. Now with new criminal laws coming into the picture, that is decriminalized and is now treated as a case that needs to be dealt with compassion, not with the harshness of a way we deal with a criminal. Okay, so this conception of fundamental rights to deal with compassion, to empower, to deal with the element of human dignity also includes clean air. So when you are talking about any concept of GS2, it will fall under respective. Either it is about design, either it is about institutional flaws. Why isn't it working? Or it is about accountability, institutional accountability. If the design is flawed, obviously execution will be flawed. So institutions will be flawed. If institutions are good, the philosophy of the design is good, execution is bad at the federal level. If that is also good, there is no grievance redressal mechanism. That is also good, there is no outcome. So many problems are there at every step. And for every single problem, there is a antidote. You as the aspiring bureaucrat, as a problem solver, should first learn the art of breaking down the problem into multiple statements. If you see, there is a approach where UPSC is moving away from silos. Previously, if the problem statement was only about federalism, it was a straightforward question. Now you have design, you have execution, institutions, outcomes, all of them clubbed together in a single paper. For example, you can read out questions in GS2. Let me read out GS2 questions because I want to clarify this point. A lot of you guys are just reading it in silos. If you don't see the interconnections between topics without conceptual clarity, it's going to be extremely difficult to score marks in GS2 going forward. Same is the case with other subjects also. Okay, take a look at this question. See, just example so that we can finish this orientation of GS2. 13th question, discuss the evolution of collegium system. Collegium system in India, advantages, disadvantages. Till now, everything is fine. But here comes a twist. Comparison of constitutions. This is judiciary. When the syllabus says that we can compare constitutions, that is how he asked. Critically examine the advantages and disadvantages of the system of appointment of the judges of Supreme Court of India with US. We have no clarity sometimes on this part. You are expected to know this. Now, one famous organization released a booklet worth 700 pages, which has US, UK, South Africa, other constitutions also. And there are people taking printouts of that and sitting. How many questions do you have on this topic? I don't know how they are going to complete those 700 pages. Funny part. They're preparing it for GS2. I'll show you one more question. See, this is a pure design principle question. 11th question. Constitutional morality is the fulcrum which acts as an essential check upon high functionaries and citizens alike. This is nothing but the philosophy of constitutionalism. It's a limitation on power. In view of the above observation of the Supreme Court, explain the concept of constitutional morality and its application. Design part. Now, application. That is the institutional part. To ensure balance between judicial independence versus judicial accountability. Previously, these were standalone questions. This is a standalone question. That is why previous year questions are very important. What joins them together is a current affair aspect where the transition was not explained in a single article. That is why it is important to first understand the principles, because you will have to apply them in multiple places. Now take a look at another question. Examine the evolving pattern. Take a look at the question. The 13th or 14th question. Examine the evolving pattern of center state financial relations. How far have the recent reforms impacted? So you need to know the reforms also. Reforms impacted fiscal federalism. Now, let me ask you a question. How many of you know the subheadings of center state relations chapter in Lakshmikant? Can you tell me the subheadings? Okay, we are talking about the third part. And we are not talking what is the financial relations. We are asking the evolving pattern. What do you think can be the answer here? That comes under economics, right? Then why are we talking about polity here? Why is this question asked in polity? It's essentially about money only. But why are we talking about it in polity paper? There must be something in that process flow. Now take a look at this. Where are we talking about? Federal design. Distribution of power, not money. We are talking about distribution of power, not finances. Decentralization. Yeah. So, yeah. Center state financial relations. So, we need to have a clear cut idea about what are the taxation powers available before GST, after GST. Your ability to list them down. Secondly, your ability to articulate the financial impact on the state exchequer. After that, talk about the recent reforms. How many of you know the reforms? Except GST, tell me any other point. What is the amendment number for GST? Is this a previous year question? Which year? You should know the 2016 or 17. If somebody asks you this question, 2016 or 17, what will your answer be like? Logically think, when did it come into action? But when did it actually get passed? You will give some time for one taxation system to another, right? So is it 16 or 17? Go back and check. Execution is 17. When was the question asked? You need to know the motivation of UPSC also, time period also. Why are they asking that question? Look at the nature of the question. If it is already executed, they might ask on the teething issues of implementation. When is the exam conducted? Let's say if it is in 2017, if the paper is in 2017, 1st July 2017 is the implementation date, if I'm not wrong. In 2 months, do you think you will have a clarity on the execution? That too in the heat of the mains pressure. So think about it. When did they ask? What is the kind of questions they'll ask? So this will answer your doubts. How many years of current affairs should we prepare? Doesn't matter. He can ask you anything. You should be updated on the theme. How many years current affairs should we prepare for this? Any answer? Please tell me. I want to know. 2017. Can I show this question and start fear mongering that you have to prepare current affairs from 2017? Otherwise, how will you answer this? Fiscal federalism. Next part. Reforms. What reforms are we talking about? Any idea? Any, at least slight hint in the direction? Finance Commission. Do we have any tax reforms of late? The only bet is Finance Commission. What about Finance Commission? That is all we can think of. What reforms are we talking about? Safe answer. Decentralization. But how? The same answer is true for every Finance Commission. Demographic. That is the shift from 14th to 15th. But how recent is recent? Is 10 years recent? There is a plan for 2020 and 21 where we were having decentralization in terms of funds even at local government. FRBM targets are revised. COVID time, you have seen local governments getting more taxation money. You've also seen how GST has this component called compensation. That was also, something discussed here. All these points, it's literally impossible to think of it from a polity standpoint. You are more likely to think of all these points in terms of numbers, not processes. You will not know the laws, you will not know the clauses, you will not know the institutional mechanisms that you have to write in GS2. So while you are preparing for GS3 and memorizing all those numbers, you should also know the corresponding laws. How can you revise GST rates? What is the process? Are you aware of this? We only remember this 2/3. That's all we remember. But if you have to generate an answer, 150-word answer out of that, it's going to be difficult. Impact of GST on federal expenditure for social welfare. How does GST impact the governance mechanisms at the state level for public service delivery? Is this an unfair question? No, it is an atrocious question when I am asking now. But UPSC will ask if it wants to. But you need to start that line of thinking where you can combine both economics and polity. And if you're not comfortable with that, at one point or the other, you will have to face the music. A lot of candidates in this year were stumped. I'm presuming that anyone who wrote a very decent principle driven answer is going to get very good marks in GS2. Everybody thinks that their papers are bad, but anyone who has written logical answers from a polity standpoint will have exceptionally good scores this year. That is my prediction, but it can be normalized. Let's see. Because it is tough for everyone, not just you. So the point that I'm trying to make through this fundamental rights article is this. You need to start thinking in terms of interdisciplinary concepts. And even within the GS2, it's like a process. You need to understand the design. Think like a systems engineer, where every part is interconnected and is linked to GS1, GS3, GS4. Is there a lack of connection between GS2 and GS4? Can you say that? No. That is why you need to master this argumentation. When the question is asked in GS2, argue from polity standpoint. The same question is asked in GS3, develop the knack to argue from a economy standpoint. It's not going to be easy. but you'll have to do it. Okay. Moving forward. I think that's it. Is there any other? All right. This one more. Yeah, this part. AI guidelines. See, the other day we were talking about this AI guidelines. There is a design philosophy. The design philosophy here is the government does not want to look at AI like a villain. That is the larger idea. Yes, there are some bad use cases, deep fakes, misinformation. But in this context, given the fact that India is the hub of services, IT services, we cannot afford to not upgrade our population with this skill set. And if you want to do that, you cannot look at it with some suspicion. Every technology is good and bad. Let's focus on the good things, regulate the bad things. This should be our philosophy. And this is more or less the government guidelines. Do we have a law at this point of time for regulating AI? No. The law is much more stricter in EU, European Union. Anything that has got to do with digital governance in your prelims, if it sounds harsh, if it is strict, and there is an option which shows EU, and if you are in a situation where if you don't take that risk, you will be out of the race, go ahead and tick EU. I don't know if this advice will harm you or give you a benefit. So take it with a pinch of salt. If it's going to help you, go ahead and put it, because that is how UPSC usually thinks. But if it is a topic that is in news and it is in discussion, you need to be aware. Is India law as strict as EU? Answer is no. Please see if the statement is saying so. Okay. So go through this. We've already discussed these points, the principles of AI regulation in India. You can have a direct question on this, either in prelims or in mains, because it's a very landmark event, AI guidelines. So store this article from the Indian Express and, keep looking at these red points. Everything is self-understood. Okay, just for the sake of our curiosity, let's see whatever we discussed in GS2 as a process today. Is that reflecting in this guidelines or not? Let us see. Look at just the, side headings. Empower. Very first step, empowerment. Is it having a philosophy? Then adopt a graded liability system. When we are talking about a system, it is about institutions. Then integrate AI with DPI, that is digital public infrastructure, to promote scalability, interoperability, inclusivity. We're talking about efficiency. Same thing. Then we are conducting safety evaluations. Grievance redressal mechanism should be there, right? So you need to know your weak point. And then data availability. Adoption with robust data portability standards and data governance frameworks. There should be a process. And finally, you should encourage the relevant data sets to create culturally representative models. This is a very specific point to the technology of AI. See, large language models, as they're called, they're trained upon data created by human beings, and the engineers who are designing this model are also humans. As much as they would want to be unbiased, there is a high chance that they will be biased. So, it is the role of the government to ensure that, let's say, an OpenAI model or Google model is exhibiting a bias. So, government should have a say in calling it out. So, this is how every governance framework is designed. And I want you to start thinking on those lines. Don't try to by heart these keywords. Map them to your process, understand it, assimilate it. Rely less on your memory, more on your logic and understanding. It will flow. You will not be worried about your mains paper in GS2. Trust me on this. The amount of data you have to by heart will be very less when you go through principles. But if you are sitting with a magazine compilation and piling up notes after notes, good luck. You're not going to write good answers in this kind of questions without conceptual clarity. The skill that you need to learn is the ability to articulate an argument. Argumentative skill. You need to convince the examiner that you are the right candidate, and it will not come without conceptual clarity and the interlinkages within the system of GS2 and also its connection with other papers. This is what I wanted to tell you today. That's it for the day. Thank you.